Time now for Sunday Politics. Well, after weeks of feuding and counter-demands, we've got some breaking news on the Liberal and National Party's reunification.
Yeah, let's bring in 7 News political editor Mark Riley live in Canberra. And Riles, what do we know?
Well, what we know is that the on-again, off-again coalition relationship is on again, Roy, and it'll be formalised today, is my understanding, talking to Liberals and Nationals this morning. David Littleproud and Susan Lee coming to a new agreement. That agreement is a little bit complicated. I'll run you through the details as I know them. So we had, just going back to tours, we had 3 national frontbenchers who resigned from the Shadow Cabinet because they were accused of breaching Shadow Cabinet solidarity when they voted against the government's increased hate law legislation, and then all Nats walked out of Shadow Cabinet in solidarity and broke the coalition apart again. And there have been fractious talks over 2 weeks since then. So today a resolution. So the 3 were told they would have to serve a 6-month suspension at first. They will now be 6 weeks, which effectively is about 4 weeks because we're 2 weeks into this. And Susan Lee has offered for all other front benchers from the Nationals to rejoin Shadow Cabinet, including David Littleproud and Kevin Hogan, the deputy, but they have refused on the basis of national solidarity. One in, one out, all out. So all national front benchers will serve that 6-week suspension, another 4 weeks and a couple of days to go. But in the meantime, David Littleproud and Kevin Hogan, the leadership team, will sit in Shadow Cabinet. They won't have portfolios, but they will be part of the leadership team. They'll sit on the front bench. The rest of the Nats will sit on the back bench, but you will have a formal coalition and you will have a coalition opposition. So the Nationals will come back as members of the opposition parties. That's the deal. What was the deal breaker here? I reckon it was John Howard through the week. His intervention was very material. He said that they had to reform as a political imperative that transcends all else in front of the coalition parties. That was a signal to Susan Lee to soften her demands, which was in protection of the Shadow Cabinet solidarity, and she has done that. So what does it do for her? Well, it really does build a shield for her against these pressures on her leadership. It doesn't mean that she won't be challenged. This still remains, in my view, the most important week of Susan Lee's political career. She will need to do her damnedest to survive it. This is a good start. Angus Taylor is still there. There are still people on the Conservative side of the Liberal Party who want to push against Susan Lee this week, who want to push a spill because, you know, common sense and ambition don't always come in balance in politics, in fact, very rarely. And so those forces are still there. But this is a good start to the week for Susan Lee. If she can put the coalition back together today, that removes one argument for a transition in the leadership. Angus Taylor might have been able to say, I will put the coalition back together. Well, now it is. So that's a positive for Susan Lee. Yeah,
very interesting indeed, especially when you think back to, about a week ago, David Littleproud is saying, no, the coalition will not reform if Susan Lee is leader. So
that's right.
Quite an extraordinary negotiation.
It's a long way back from that, isn't it? A long way back, and there's been concessions on both sides. Yeah.
So when you're talking about this 6 weeks, which effectively is 4 weeks, in 4 weeks, they all take back up their Shadow Cabinet positions, do they?
That's right. So in the 4 weeks in the transition, just David Littleproud and Kevin Hogan will sit in Shadow Cabinet, but without portfolios because they're in solidarity with the other 3 and the rest of the Nationals front bench. But in 4 weeks' time, they will all come back to their front bench and they will all then reassume their portfolio responsibilities.
Look, of course, Riles, we've seen, whilst the Libs and the Nats have been taking political bark off each other, One Nation has skyrocketed in the polls. Yeah. What now happens to Pauline Hanson's support now that the coalition is back together?
Well, I reckon it holds in the short term, Roy, because any way you look at it, this has still been a disaster and quite the unedifying show on the coalition side. So I've said it a couple of times this week, but it holds true. If you act like self-obsessed, egotistical, non-electable rabble, the people will believe that's exactly what you are, and that's what voters are saying about the coalition parties at the moment. And yes, there's a big protest that is being parked with Pauline Hanson, but while people are there, they're listening to her and they're hearing a lot of their disgruntlement being echoed by Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce and others and saying, well, maybe this home suits me. So we'll see what the long tail effect is. But in the short term, don't expect the rush of people back to vote for the coalition or tell pollsters they're going to vote for the coalition in the next couple of weeks. They've got to re-earn that trust of the people. They've reformed the coalition. OK, good start. Yeah. But now they've got to reform that trust with voters, and that will take a longer time.
A lot of brand damage there.
Yeah, they have to be seen to kiss and make up. We're a unified team now. All right, Riles, big news this morning. Coalition has reformed. Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.